Hello, fellow homebrewers. JP here, and I want to introduce to you the brand new Brew Built X1 Conical Series available at More Beer. More Beer sells the highest standard in homebrewing equipment, and the Brew Built Conicals are just that. They're made from mirror-polished 304 stainless steel, and they come with loads of features that you and I have been looking for. They have a full 2-inch bottom dump valve, which will eliminate your clogging issues, while the sturdy base includes 4 reinforced legs, just like those big Pro tanks do. More Beer also carries the Brew Built line of options and add-ons like casters, pressure kits, and even external glycol chillers. So you can find out more about the new Brew Built X1 Conical Unitanks by going over to morebeer.com for detailed videos on the entire line of Brew Built Conicals. You can trust Brew Built with your next fermentation, and you can trust More Beer to find the right conical for you. Brew Built at morebeer.com.
Great beer is about drinkability. Doesn't matter the style.
You guys are like walking beer Wikipedia. That's the first time that you've ever accepted me as a person.
Or you have a fermentation in your gut.
I'm jet propelled at all times.
How many guys do you think that you have the privilege to slap?
Somebody who's never tasted a commercial example, and this is how you know everything about this beer? Please, you don't.
I think that's bullshit.
I think it's bullshit too.
Wow. Are you guys going to arm wrestle?
No.
They're going to teabag fight instead.
Yeah. You heard of Junkyard Wars?
Can I get another high five, Beavis?
Now, live from the Brewing Network studios in Northern California, this is the radio program for home brewers, craft brewers, beer lovers, and beer geeks. It's your only source for live beer radio that brings expert brewers together with, well, expert drinkers. This is the radio program with a head on it. This is The Session.
Welcome, everybody. It's another fine episode of The Session here on the Brewing Network, brought to you, of course, always by the fine folks at More Beer. If you want to homebrew with the best ingredients from the best people and shipped to you the best possible way in a box, I guess, I don't know, go morebeer.com. Hit them up. Get your kit, get your ingredients, get your equipment, get your advice, get everything you can from the folks at More Beer. They are here to help you. And, while you're at it, that homebrew that you make from More Beer, why don't you send it into Dr. Homebrew so we can judge it? Because we are looking for people. We have a few openings coming up on the next few months of shows. You can email Brian at thebrewingnetwork.com to get situated with that whole mess. And come on, Dr. Homebrew. We won't be too mean. I think that's going to be our new tagline. Dr. Homebrew, we won't be too mean.
Are you mean on that show?
No, not at all. No.
Are you sometimes a little mean?
I harass people sometimes if they send, if you get like 4 shows of hazy IPAs. I'm like, I don't like.
Wait, well, hold on a second. Time out. Do you don't like hazy IPAs? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's not that anymore. It's more of like, there's only so much you can say on a homebrew level about it. Where you're like, I got 2 in a row. I don't know what to do. So that's in those shows, I let Brian and Brian talk. They're the judges. I just go, oh, okay. This is great. You did good. It's not contaminated, and it's to style. But it's stuff like that where, my favorite shows on those are ones we get like Kvike and, just these weird styles that you just don't, find anymore, right? It's like homebrewing. My favorite part of homebrewing is drinking beers that you don't normally just get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on those shows where you're having, are we on the air right now? I'm just giving like pro tips right now.
Okay.
About how to handle the show.
Yeah.
You could just compare them. You could just do a side by side. Well, this one's like this one has more of this, and just sort of like evaluate them individually.
Well, I appreciate your
compared to each other.
I appreciate your advice. I just used the first beer style that came to mind. It's not really a thing that's ever happened. So I was just talking. I was lying. It was a radio version of lying.
You're never supposed to do that. Even if you are, you're not supposed to disclose that. It's like negating your partner in improv.
Okay. All
keep
right.
moving.
Okay. I forgot Sully lived in L.A. for a while.
He's an improv artist now. Yeah. And a lawyer, apparently. But go ahead. Let's start the show. Come on.
That's true. Today, we are joined by Michael Bernstein from Buck Wild Brewing. Mike, what's going on, man? Thanks for hanging on the show with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So you are a brand new brewery, right? You opened within the last year.
We opened, I was just telling Sean, we opened early November of 2020. So what's that, 8 months ago?
God, not even a year old. And I'm excited to talk to you not only about opening a brewery in the middle of COVID, which is, sort of becoming a theme on the show. There's a lot of people doing that, and and that's great. There's you can't really keep a good brewery closed. You know what I mean? But your vibe, your goal, your portfolio is
unique selling proposition.
100%.
Our shtick.
Our shtick. I didn't want to say it. Is gluten-free. 100% gluten-free. Yeah.
We are 100% gluten-free, 100% dedicated gluten-free facility. California's first and only dedicated tap room and brewery. Yeah.
That's exciting.
California's first 100% gluten-free brewery.
That's right. No barley, no wheat, and no rye will find its way inside the doors of our facility here.
Wow. That's crazy. And, we were talking a little bit when I picked up the beers, and you'd mentioned that. I'm like, well, I know we've had gluten-free beers from breweries, I think even in California, but to your point, you're the only one doing it 100%.
Well, I don't know which breweries you've tried or checked out, but my guess is what you've been trying are gluten-reduced beers.
Oh, that could be it too.
There's a whole conversation we could have around the difference between gluten-reduced and gluten-free beers.
Yeah.
Very succinctly, I'll just say a gluten-reduced beer is not a gluten-free beer. A gluten-reduced beer is, in fact, brewed with barley, wheat, or rye, and an enzyme is used in the fermenter that basically takes a gluten protein, which looks like this, and it breaks it up like that, so it's more difficult to detect. But it is indeed still in solution there.
Makes it more difficult.
We don't risk any of that. We just brew with 100% gluten-free grains.
When you say more difficult to detect, to me, that sort of means that the gluten-reduced, or to me, I read that as the gluten-reduced is more of a gimmick than a solution.
Deal.
Yeah. Is that?
I don't know if gimmick is the right word. It's very difficult to detect it based on current testing methodologies. Anything post-fermentation, it's difficult to detect accurately gluten levels. This is me on my soapbox a little bit. But,
go for it.
Since you made the mistake of asking, I think what has happened is people have detected, they've identified an opportunity within the gluten-free market. Mm-hmm. It is a growing subset of the craft beer world, and people are trying to enter it any way they can. And from a cost perspective, brewing a gluten-reduced beer is much more affordable than going fully 100%
gluten-free. Okay. Interesting.
So how does it? So it's like, so if we could stay in that space for a moment. So when you're saying that there's no way to detect it, so if you can't detect it, so how do you know it's there? So I guess I would say, is it because the folks who, there's a large segment of the population that has, is very sensitive to this. Are they affected by those beers that are labeled, or beverages that are labeled as gluten reduced?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Sean. The easiest way to answer it is everybody's different. I certainly am impacted by gluten-reduced beers. If I drink half of one of them, I feel awful for days on end.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not worth it for me. Early on when I was gluten-free, I attempt certain cheat days just to, because I missed a solid craft beer, and I paid the price for days. It just wasn't worth it for me.
So that's why you got involved in it. This is a personal adventure for you to solve, because you wanted to drink beers that weren't out on the market there, that you did it as a personal, to sort of personally push your agenda along and have a business agenda as well.
Exactly. I'd love to sit here and tell you it was 100% altruistic, but it was pretty self-serving at the time, to be perfectly honest with you.
Did you start out as a home brewer and start trying to make your gluten-free beers that way?
I did, yeah. So I adopted a gluten-free diet back in 2006.
Okay.
And as I educated myself around what that really meant, I came to realize I couldn't drink these craft beers that I've been loving for years. So I started homebrewing in 2007. And I taught myself how to malt. So I'd go down to the local natural food store and I'd buy, 8 to 10 pounds of raw buckwheat. And, I'd soak it in a bucket. I'd lay it out flat. It was like a junior high science experiment, right? I'd let it sprout a little bit, and then I'd turn the oven on really low, and I'd run up our PG&E bill by, letting the malt sit in there overnight for hours on end. So I was malting my own buckwheat, and I was homebrewing my own beers at the time, yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. You must have really, I'm trying to think of something that I would do on that level of wow, I really miss, video games. So I'm going to learn how to make them myself. I could never do that. I'd be like, I just don't want to do this. I guess I'm just not going to play a video game, and that's fine. Right. But to learn the science of malting and to just do it on your own is pretty cool, man. That's a very laser focused, I like beer. Let me ask you this. Was it more of a you missed beer, or that you wanted some sense of quote unquote your old life? Or I imagine a dramatic shift in your diet like that would sort of, be a little hard to deal with.
I certainly just missed beer.
Yeah.
I loved beer. I grew up surfing and climbing and skiing and backpacking and fishing. And, one reason you enjoy all those activities is because you get to sit down with your buddies at the end of the day and crack open a cold beer. I was a guy attempting to suck down a cider or whatever it was at the time, and it just wasn't the same. And I really missed beer. And, you give me a lot of credit for saying learning the science of malting. It was much more art than science for me at the time. If it smelled bad, I would dump it. If it smelled good, I'd continue down the process of, drying it out and roasting it. And it was really enjoyable. I loved doing it.
What was your first?
That's awesome. That's just awesome, because it's what home brewing is all about. You kind of you're a maker, you're taking on, you're doing something that not a lot of people do, and you want to do it for yourself, and you sort of splint it off, and you had to malt your own grain and all that. And also, the market out there for gluten-free beers was not that great. I have relatives back in Pittsburgh who have celiacs, and they're begging me to make something. Because it's just not great. Where do you find it? Who makes it? It's usually mass produced, and it's not that interesting.
Well, I can give a plug to another gluten-free brewery out in Pittsburgh, specifically by the name of Aroaks.
Aroaks.
Aroaks. I don't know much about them, but I've heard great things about the beer, so they might want to check that out.
Excellent.
There you go, Sean. How was your first batch at home of gluten-free beer that you malted on your own and you carried through the whole process? How was that?
You mean the first one I actually attempted to put to my lips and sip?
Yeah.
Sure. That was probably batch 4 or 5.
Okay. Wow.
To be honest with you. But that first batch was more than drinkable. It tasted like a really good beer. It had a number of characteristics that actually did remind me of cider. It didn't have much body. It was pretty flat, pretty thin.
Mm-hmm.
But it was good. It tasted like I think I was using Hallertau hops. Just tasted like a good lager.
Okay.
I guess is the best description.
Like a good light lager kind of thing where there's not much to it, but it's gluten-free.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I didn't get sick off of it, so that was an added bonus.
How did you deal with the yeast aspect? Because, when I was working at More Beer years back, I worked on some sort of gluten-free, program that we were trying to, figure it out. And I believe it was sorghum. It was actually maybe buckwheat, where you germinate it and it has that ooze, that slime that comes through, when you're soaking it. And then, sending that into a lab to test it. And we also sent in some liquid brewer's yeast, and, that has gluten in it. it's not detectable, or there's under the threshold, I think, of like 20 pp. I forget when now. It's too many beers ago. So what did you do for yeast wise?
It's a great question with a simple answer. I was using dry yeast.
Okay.
Because the dry yeast was grown on molasses, which was gluten-free.
Okay.
Yeah, but to your point, those liquid yeasts, the starters contain gluten, so those were off limits.
Wow.
I would never have thought about that part, actually.
Yeah, neither did we. It was a weird thing. I was like, you know what? We need to test every aspect of all these ingredients because we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know. And to Michael's point, like, if you're very, very sensitive, you need to know. You got to put the control in your hands. And so I think that's really cool, Michael, that you went and, did the whole route. So as a home brewer, because, we do have a fair amount of home brewers listening to the show, how do you then sort of dial in your recipe? You said your first one didn't really have a whole lot of body. It was just sort of is what it is. How do you then progress to fleshing out and rounding out this beer to make it taste more like a beer? Because that is sort of, the big complaint in the space, I think. It's like gluten-free beers generally don't taste like beer. They're just sort of watered down because you only have a couple of grains to work with. Yeah,
back in the early days, that certainly was accurate.
Mm-hmm.
That was the case. I mean, I have memories of using honey, agave, certainly the sorghum syrups that you referenced a minute ago, brown rice syrups, all those sort of things. I mean, those are great sugars, great fermentables, but those all ferment out, 98, 99%. So you are left with a very light, dry beer. So I did a lot of reading, and I learned that, in making the buckwheat malt, perhaps I should make some grain that isn't malted, right? So it's not going to give out the sugars. It's just, it's going to lend more body.
Okay.
To the beer. And also I would use maltodextrin at the time. That helped to, thicken it up and give it a little more body at the same time. But just a lot of trial and error. I mean, I think back to those all those days I spent in my garage just tinkering with any recipe I could find.
Yeah.
Any ingredient I could find and to, develop different sorts of recipes. Some worked, most didn't.
Okay.
But trial and error for sure.
How many batches do you think you ran through before you hit on, a recipe? You're like, this is it. This is
on
my recipe.
On my homebrew scale?
Yeah.
I'd say probably 3 or 4. It was that 4th or 5th batch that I was able to actually put in a glass.
That's not bad, honestly, because like I have like several recipes that I still don't brew the same thing all the time. I'm just not happy with it. So I think that's cool.
Your standards are higher on the homebrew scale than mine were at the time.
See, you hear that, Sully? I have high standards.
Well, I heard it here first.
Yeah, finally.
Breaking news.
I mean, when you were home brewing and probably transferring to your brewery there in Jack London Square in Oakland, what did you have to have special equipment that the average home brewer wouldn't be using in order to make your beer?
Well, there were a lot of steps in between home brewing and landing here in Jack London Square.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much time we have this evening, Jason, but
go for it. Just take you off the leash, man. Go for it.
All right.
That's what we want to do. I want to hear your story.
I was born on a cold evening in August, and no. So I homebrewed for about 5 or 6 years, and developing a number of different recipes and improving upon them each time. And I just brewed them for myself and for friends and family. And I got to the point where I was brewing pretty consistent, high-quality gluten-free beers. And at the time, there wasn't a really good gluten-free beer on the market. I won't really name names, but I think back in 2011, 2012, there were maybe 2 or 3 on the market. So I've always kind of been this closet entrepreneur, wanting to kind of venture out on my own, but just sort of lack that light bulb idea. So I came to realize, maybe gluten-free beer could be something I pursue. There clearly was an opportunity in the market. So I called up Charlie Bamforth up at UC Davis. And I explained to him what I was trying to do.
You have to do the English accent too.
Not a chance. He might see this. And I was explaining to him what I was trying to do and what some of my challenges were. And, this was an email, and I didn't expect to ever hear back from him. He's a busy man in high demand. He got back to me within a couple hours. Turned out he was on his way down to Belmont to give a talk the next day, and he wanted to meet for coffee beforehand. So for the price of a cup of coffee, I got to meet Mr. Bamforth, and we developed a bit of a relationship, and he invited me up to Davis. They had just received a pilot brewing facility from Anheuser-Busch, and they were trying to figure out a way to, put it to good use outside of just teaching there. So I was a bit of a guinea pig in that regard, and I went up there and I rented out the facility and their expertise. I'd say I spent probably 18 months up at Davis brewing. I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say I probably brewed maybe close to 24 batches up there. So it was tinkering with my process. It was tinkering with my recipe. Most critically, it was tinkering with a non-existent supply chain at the time. I mean, recall I was malting all of my own buckwheat and maxing out at about 10 or 15 pounds at a time. My wife would have kicked me out of the house if I tried malting, 20, 40, 100 pounds that I would be requiring at Davis. So I was calling around to all these different malt houses, asking if they could stop their, production of a couple tons, to run some buckwheat through their system.
Sure. Why not?
For me. And I got the same response from most of them. It's, click.
Right.
So then, I had the thought to reach out to some of these companies who sprout grains, right?
Oh.
So there's a lot of sprouted grain that goes into pastas and breads and things like that.
Okay, yeah.
So I reached out to a handful of companies and I said, look, by virtue of sprouting these grains, you're essentially malting them. The only thing you're not doing is going the extra step to roast them. So I was getting sprouted green malt is kind of what we would all think of it as. And then I would engage a coffee roaster to see if they could run it through their coffee roaster to, get some dark flavors and colors out of it. I was really piecing this together. And,
wow.
Every new supplier I had, I would, take 50 pounds of whatever they would give me, and I'd run up to UC Davis and I'd try to brew a batch. And failed more often than I succeeded up there.
Yeah. Well.
Had a lot of issues, but after maybe batch 6 or 7, we really started dialing it in. And so then after some time at Davis, I had my recipe dialed in, and I decided to venture out of the safety of a learning environment into more the real world. And I was welcomed at EJ Fair.
Oh, nice.
Good old JJ.
Yeah.
He welcomed me in to brew on their 30-barrel system. And I went through 7 batches, dumped every single one.
Oh, man.
I couldn't, for the life of me, I couldn't scale from UC Davis's 40-gallon system to EJ Fair's 30-barrel system. The math wasn't working out for me. I was using too much hops, not enough pale malt, too much dark malt. My beers were getting comparisons to dirty ashtrays and things like that. So
Sure.
A lot of beer went down the drain at EJ Fair.
Wow.
So then I thought, let's take a step back. Maybe 30 barrels is a little too ambitious. So I started looking for a 15-barrel system throughout the Bay Area. And I hooked up with Drew and Jenny down at Strike Brewing in San Jose.
Okay. Right.
Really good folks down there.
Nice.
Brewed our first batch at Strike, had the exact same issues as I had at EJ Fair. Just
Okay.
really sharp, acrid flavors, and it went down the drain. So,
which to me that I think that's good, because then it wasn't EJ Fair, it was just the recipe, so it's a fixable thing. I don't know. I heard that and I go, well, that's good news.
It was
Yeah.
actually quite fixable. I just wasn't asking the right question of the right person.
Yeah.
And it turns out when you scale recipes from 40 gallons up to 30 barrels, it's not a 1-for-1. You don't just multiply it straight.
Right.
See, Sean's saying, yeah, obviously, right?
Sean does that.
Where were you?
Well, I mean, they probably could have helped you out in that department, I think, because I think they've probably done that with other contracts that they've used. But I think because you're using these unique ingredients and probably processed, that it was probably just like, I don't know what the hell's going on here. So there was probably that aspect of it.
Yeah.
I think you're right on. They're like, let's just kind of let Mike do his thing, and hopefully he doesn't break anything. Turns out I was, very simply stated, I was overdoing the bittering hops.
Yep.
Oh, okay. That's it. That's all you had to do.
And that was it? That's what gave you all those acrid flavors? And
that was probably 80% of what was going on.
Wow.
Yeah.
So second batch at Strike Brewing, we throttled back the bittering hops, and it was a solid B+, A- product.
Wow.
Drinking the beer, it was unbelievable. And then we did a third batch and improved it even more. And then we actually bottled that up, threw it in some 4-pack carriers, and got it into the market. And this was in early 2016.
Oh, geez. Okay. Wow. What was that first, take me that tasting of the first batch that worked out? Because you've been doing this, you've been spending money, you've been on the phone, running yourself into the ground, coffee roasters and sprouted grain and doing all the fun stuff, right? Trying to figure it out, putting your head through a wall at EJ Fair, trying to figure out what's going on. And then you finally achieve, like you said, B+, A- beer. There's got to be a feeling there.
Yeah. I mean, after the tears were wiped from my face, the tears of joy.
Yeah.
It was kind of a feeling of, God, that was easy. Right.
Sure. Well, yeah. Once you get rid of the problems, it's easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was thrilled. I mean, it had been quite a long road, and you hit on, but only a few of the issues I had come up against. So
what kind of beer was it? I mean, what was the style?
It was a pale ale, and I don't want to spoiler alert, but it's come a long way. We'll be trying this in just a little bit.
Absolutely.
It's now an A+ product. I'll just
that a boy.
I'll ruin the show right at the beginning here.
Sully, I think you've met an equal as far as like promoting product. I feel like Mike and Sully are the same level of any chance they get. This is the superior product right here. This is the best one, and yeah, Mike. What you have to do is start giving out your address.
You got to drop it in. You got to make it happen.
You got to put your address out, the 563 2nd Street. That's Sully's address. Everybody knows it because that's all he talks about. Well, Mike, you actually, just zoom out for a little bit. I mean, where is your place? I mentioned Jack London Square, but we haven't really. There's people listening to this all over the world. Where are you right now?
Yeah, so Oakland, California has this beautiful waterfront district called Jack London Square. We're just outside of the kind of high retail section of Jack London Square in what's referred to as the Jack London Historic Warehouse District. So we are just off of Interstate 980, which is a connector from 24 to 880. We're in this beautiful building in 1946. I believe it was built in 46.
Wow.
An old chicken and poultry processing and distribution building. There's some crazy poultry mojo in here that we had to clean out in the early days.
Still?
But, yeah, I'm actually really bummed, Jason. I would have loved to have had you down here for the show. It would have been great to
get
all
for sure
this on camera. And you're seeing my dingy little Dungeness office here, but outside in the tap room and brewery.
It is beautiful.
Space.
Yeah,
my son My son rode for Berkeley High, and they're at the Aquatic Center just around the corner from you.
They kicked him
and
off
unfortunately,
the
when
team.
I was driving by your place all the time, I was like, my God, that building is beautiful. I mean, it's not an old chicken building anymore. I mean, you've done a lot to it. It's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. Well, what I like the most about it is walking by on the sidewalk. It's really unassuming. Like it just doesn't look like much. But once you get in, it's got this beautiful double barrel truss wood ceiling. And just windows throughout.
Yep.
a lot of beautiful natural light. It's a really special place. We lucked out.
When I went to pick up the beer, the space, it's sort of like an open floor plan, I guess. So you have the tap room with a bunch of tables and the big windows and everything. And then the brewery is just right there. You're just looking right at the brewery, which is very cool. It is very flowy. I don't know. There's like a flow to the space. It is a very nice space. So if you're in Oakland, definitely check it out.
Yeah, thank you. As we were building it out, as we were designing it, the thought was, what's a big reason why people love to go to tap rooms versus just a bar, right? People love to see how the sausage is made, right? They love to
exactly.
They love to hear it. They love to smell it. So to Jason's point, I mean, when you come in here for a beer and a dinner, the brewery is right there front and center. I mean, you could wad up a napkin and probably hit our lauder ton.
Don't do it, but you could.
We don't encourage.
I heard on this podcast that Mike said I could do this. Where is he? Bring him out here right now.
Hey, Mike, obviously you haven't been doing this forever. What did you do before you got into this racket?
I was in financial services for a little over 20 years. Worked at Wells Fargo for about 8 years, and then Charles Schwab most recently for another 8 or 9 years.
That's a great background to have into the brewing industry, by the way.
I realized my math only added up to about 16 there, so I had another financial services job before Wells. So.
Needless to say, you probably like brewing a little bit better.
It's more fun, having a tangible product.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, something you can sit down and share with people. It really meant a lot to me.
But that's cool. Great. I mean, that's the passion part of it. But your business acumen has probably served you well in starting up this venture.
I'd like to think so. I mean, I know how numbers work, and what should go in the plus column and what should go in the minus column, and we're still trying to figure some of those numbers out. But I know what they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then doing the whole thing through COVID probably just threw a big giant wrench into your plan.
I wasn't in the plan. As I was building out my pro forma, I had 3 different scenarios, kind of very conservative, middle of the road, and then if we really just knock it out of the park and go gangbusters. But I did not have the COVID scenario baked into any of my projections. No. And, like all my colleagues, I mean, Sean, I'm sure it's been really rough. I mean,
oh yeah, it's been awful. But I just imagine, Jason mentioned at the top of the show that there are a lot of breweries open during COVID. But I think we all have to remember that you, Michael, and you could probably speak to this, have been working on this well before the pandemic started. So it's almost like you have everything set up and you're ready to go. Okay, here we go. We got the space. We got it locked in. We found it. We got our deposit down. We're paying rent, blah, blah, blah. And then this happened. You're like, crap. And then that's where the brakes go on. So, but you still have to open because you've got to get income going. So
that's exactly right. I mean, we broke ground in April of 19. And
yeah,
at the time, I didn't even know how to spell COVID. So it certainly wasn't in the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. What a scary time, man. But you know what's not scary? I've been drinking your Kolsch. I'm the king of segues, Mike. I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, but
he is. He gets an award for it every year.
I give it to myself. It's cool. I've only turned it down once, and that's because I didn't deserve it. Tell me a little bit about your Kolsch, because as we were talking earlier in the show, my experience with gluten-free beers or even gluten-reduced beers is that it just doesn't really taste like beer, but this tastes like beer. It actually tastes like a Kolsch. And for me, the problem I always had making them, years and years ago, or, drinking them, they can be thin and watery and not have a lot of oomph in the middle, which is what a lot of people complain about, because that's what they miss from the beers. But this has that. Not that a Kolsch is super body, heavy, but all beer needs it unless you're doing a Miller Lite. And even then there's maybe a little bit, right?
There's some body there.
But this has it for sure.
Yeah, no, it's our easy drinking golf course beer. Believe it or not, we get people who come into the tap room who, when asked what their favorite style of beer is, they'll tell us they're actually not much of a beer drinker. So I recommend the Kolsch. I think it's a great kind of gateway beer. It's really easy and light. And we get people who are not beer drinkers try the Kolsch and they come back for 2 or 3. They love it. It clocks in at 5.1% ABV. We use a combination of millet, rice, and buckwheat in this beer.
It looks beautiful. I mean, it's super bright and clear. That looks wonderful. Good head retention. I'm just commenting on the looks because I don't have any beer here.
Well, if you would have answered your phone, I would have gave it to you. Yeah.
There's always that, isn't there?
One here, so we ran it through the filter. Let's see. We canned this last Thursday. So this is under a week old. And it is delicious. I'm sorry to rub it in, Chump.
Yeah, it's fine, Michael. Anyway, let's talk about something else. No.
No, it is very good, man. And so when you're designing these recipes, like you talked about your pale ale, how long did it take for you to get this Kolsch to where you wanted it?
First batch.
No.
Oh, look at this guy swinging the bat around.
Yeah. Really, first batch, you nailed it.
Yeah, and that, seems a little cocky until I tell you that I didn't brew it. I'm smart enough to hire a Cracker Jack head brewer.
Okay, all right. Well, see, that makes all the sense in the world then.
Yeah, but in all honesty, so Cameron Collier is our head brewer. Cameron spent some time at Gordon Biersch, little place called Fort Point. And then most recently kind of jumped around and helped Standard Deviant and Pacifica Brewing as well. And when Cameron came on just about a year or so ago, we sat down and, I took a full 20, 30 seconds to tell him everything I knew about gluten-free malt. And I basically just got out of his way. And, I mean, what he has been able to do is miraculous. I never dreamed that the quality of this beer could be where it is today.
That's exciting.
Wow.
Is your equipment in your brewery any different? I mean, how are you lautering with these ingredients? Do you have a mash press? I mean, what's going on there, Mike?
Yeah. So no mash press. We have a separate mash mixer, a separate lauter tun, and then a combination kettle whirlpool, 15-barrel system, which, is not a coincidence. 15 barrels is what I experienced some success with down at Strike Brewing, so I wanted to kind of emulate that.
Yeah.
Outside of that, the only real customization is our false bottom. Mm-hmm. It's, water cut. I don't remember the size of the slats, but it's a little narrower than what you would see in a regular barley-based brew house.
Okay, because
so how are you lautering? Are you adding rice hulls? How are you getting in that? I mean, I imagine those ingredients can get kind of gummy and
you get gummy for sure, especially the buckwheat. We use rice, malted rice, as one of our with the hulls still intact. Rice hulls right there, along with fermentable sugar. So it's kind of a twofer for that one. But, before, in the early days, before I was exposed to rice malt, I was using just millet and buckwheat. Excuse me. And I was throwing in quite a bit of rice hulls at the time. The malts can get pretty darn gummy, pretty sticky.
I can imagine. Yeah, this is a good beer, man. It's a great entry into gluten-free beers because
if you sat down,
beer.
Jason, if you were to try that beer blind, how would you react to it?
That's a good question because
so poke your eyes out.
Tell me what I am a super taster, so I have I have a magnifying glass for a palate, but
as you chug that thing down,
what would I say? I mean, as far as like if I could tell that something was going on, something different, it wasn't malt-based.
I mean, look, it's not a deposition. You're not being legally bound here, but you are tasting this right now, and as you said, you are a super taster, and that's what comes up on my phone when you call me. It says super taster, Jason. So, are you? I mean, I'm just wondering because I'm excited to go down there and try those, but I mean, it's beer.
This is the closest gluten-free beer I've had to beer ever.
I'll take it.
It tastes like...
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, it tastes like a beer. You know, I mean, there are differences. I think the flavors are a little bit different, but that's to be expected because that's always been the hard part. That's the barrier to entry in the space. I've always thought is that gluten-free beer, it's hard to get it to taste like beer. Even just the flavors aside, the viscosity, the mouthfeel, the way that the carbonation sits in the stupid thing. It's hard to do. But this hits all those points.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think it's really cool. Mike, let's take a quick break. I'm going to get a couple other beers, and then we're going to come back and we're going to dive deeper into the beers and learn a little bit more about gluten-free brewing and the space and all that kind of stuff. So if you give us a sec, we'll take a break. We'll come right back. Everybody, hang on. We are on the phone with Mike Bernstein from Buck Wild Brewing. Go to buckwildbrew.com. They're hanging out over in Oakland, California, and we are The Session. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Brewing Network. Because like beer, radio shouldn't suck.
Hey, thanks for sticking around, everybody. We are on with Mike from buckwildbrew.com, Buck Wild Brewing in Oakland, California, and, of course, Mr. Sean Sully O'Sullivan. Welcome.
Hey.
Welcome, boys. I'm going to crack this pale ale. And then while I do that, Mike Ron in the chat had a question for you. He said, if adding too much hops made your beers taste ashy, how did you get around that to make a pale ale?
Well, I throttled back significantly on the bittering hops I was using. I mean, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was an obscene pound of Magnum bittering hops that I was using. I mean, it was... I mentioned it to the brewer at Strike, and he's like, oh, my gosh, no, you're using like 10 times too many bittering hops.
Okay. I mean, and I think the question stems from like, ashy isn't really, or burnt or whatever, isn't really a flavor that we associate with too many hops. But I wonder if it's just because of the gluten-free malts.
Well, it was a combination of the over bittering as well as too much roasted grain.
Okay. All right. That clears it up.
Yeah.
All right. Got it. I figured it couldn't just be the bitterness, but, I don't know. I mean, depending on generally Magnum is pretty neutral when it comes to...
Yeah, but if it gets up really high, I mean, it's super acrid
do something.
And probably, in concert with the dark malts, I mean, you end up with like this... is a wonderful flavor explosion of ashtray.
It was more of like a metallic ashtray.
Got it.
Sean, actually, acrid is the perfect descriptor. It was just...
It's like...
Yeah, metallic.
Yeah, back of your tongue, size of your tongue, just like...
Yep. Not remotely passable as beer. So
we are drinking... I'm drinking the pale ale now. Mike and I are drinking the pale ale.
Hang on a second, I'm having a little water.
Well, at your age, you need to hydrate.
Okay, that's the first age joke. Okay.
It's the first age joke.
You're also possibly seeing for the first time our rebranding. All of these labels are new within the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Nice. Yeah, they look great.
Really excited about how they turned out.
Yeah, nice little lush, rolling hills right there. I like it. Tell me about
hold it up again.
Tell me about the pale ale, Mike.
So pale ale weighs in at 5.5%, 48 IBU. It's just, it's a typical American-style pale ale. We're using Chinook, Armorio, and Centennial for the hops on that. And again, rice malt, millet, and buckwheat as well. Jason, you had mentioned earlier about the body and how you were surprised it wasn't, super thin like you might expect from a gluten-free beer. That's in part the role of the buckwheat in the grain bill. Buckwheat's pretty high in protein. Okay. And one reason we use the portion of buckwheat that we use in the grain bill.
Okay. And what does the millet do?
Millet lends mostly the fermentable sugars. I mean, the rice and the millet combined.
Okay.
We get different colors to both the rice and the millet, so we get different flavors and colors coming off that as well.
Okay, so that's your special. So that and like buckwheat are your specialty malts, like the rice and the buckwheat, but your millet is sort of like your base malt.
I would say the pale rice and the pale millet.
Okay.
Both kind of serve in concert as our base malt.
Okay. All right. And that's how you sort of maybe get some of those rounder flavors. It's not just one grain.
Correct.
Yeah. If one's good, two is better.
One grain, and it's not just, one color or shade of that grain. We have different types of malts within that.
Wow, it's super bright. What are you doing for clarification?
Just run it through a filter.
What kind of filter is it? Is it plate and frame?
DE, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A DE filter, nice.
Not fancy.
Okay. What about
where's your supplier? I mean, where are you getting these ingredients from? If you could tell us.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So the rice we get from Jim Eckert. He's just outside. Actually, he's in Chico, California. So fortunately, it's just a day or two away from him. And then Grouse Malting, just outside of Fort Collins, Colorado, in a town called Wellington. So Twyla at Grouse provides the millet and the buckwheat, and Jim provides the rice.
Nice. You don't have to haul it around to coffee roasters anymore. That's good.
I've gotten so lazy, I'll tell you. I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, tapping into a supply chain, you kick back all day, man.
Exactly.
How do you handle fermentation? What's fermentation on a gluten-free beer like? Because we're used to these big, churning, bubbling, foamy, messes. Does it produce a lot of krausen like a traditional beer would?
Not as much. That's probably one thing I would point to as being a little different. And on occasion, fermentation will start off a little bit slower. But yeah, I mean, we get a good, vigorous, bubbling 24 hours into it. I wouldn't imagine it's all that different. To be honest with you, I've never worked in a barley-based brewery, so I don't really have too much to compare it to.
And you aerate it like you're aerating the wort as well, and yeast nutrients, and are using a specific yeast strain or that sort of responds to the sugars you're producing?
No, I mean, it's nothing special. Again, we're using the dry yeast. That's really the only thing to point to on that.
And you get a normal fermentation curve, you're fermenting it's high 60s, low 70s or whatever, and finishes out in 3 or 4 days, or you said it takes a little bit longer, or?
Well, you mean the whole fermentation cycle?
Well, the primary fermentation, how long does it take you to go from your original gravity to your final gravity? Is it a 3 or 4 or 5? It's also depending upon the beer, the Kolsch, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit that's a great question for my head brewer. I'm not all that close to the fermentation side of things these days. But, I can tell you, time in the tank, it's not much different than what you would expect from a regular bar.
So, okay. So, but Mike is one owner to the other. Just make it up. That's what I think.
Let's go with 4 hours.
There we go.
Bingo.
Yeah. We've already made 4 batches on
the internet. Just lit up. 4 hours. How's he doing it?
Yeah, I dig this beer, man. It's super, super interesting.
Yeah, this one is near and dear to me, as I mentioned earlier. It's the pale ale that we introduced back in early 2016. Of course, what we're drinking today doesn't all that closely resemble what I released in 2016. We've come a long way, but
sure.
What beer were you trying to emulate? What was the commercial brewery that you fell in love with and you said, by golly, I have to make this, but I have to do it gluten-free?
Deschutes Brewing Mirror Pond Pale Ale.
Oh, right on. Okay.
That was my favorite beer back when I was drinking regular beer.
Nice. And do you think you made it? Did you nail it?
I don't want to upset anyone, but I think this is pretty damn good.
You can say it's better. That's fine.
I haven't.
It's better for you.
I haven't tasted it in quite some time, so I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair, man.
I can tell you this one makes me feel better.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, it does sort of have that, and maybe you made my brain think this, but it does sort of have that those maybe darker pale ale, late 90s, early 2000s sort of vibe to it in the grain bill. So, which I think is great. It's pleasant. It leaves behind a pleasant sweetness. The hops are a little more new school, I think. So there is sort of that bright tropical thing that the kids love these days.
Amarillo and Chinook is what we've got in that.
Those are great hops,
and it's a good combo. And then I'm interested in the way the hops play with your malts, because I do think that there is a flavor difference between I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, but stop me if you think I am. Between your grain bill and like a traditional gluten based grain bill, there is a flavor difference, and I think that's the challenge is getting those two as close as possible. But just like hops play with your malt selection, I think that they play with your gluten-free malt selection as well. And I think you did a good job in selecting these hops. They are very complementary to the flavors that you get in the beer.
Yeah, well, thank you first off, but I would agree entirely. There's always the interplay, right, between the sweetness of the malt and what you're going to get out of the hops. And it's a fragile dance, right? Yeah. That balance. And I commend that my head brewer in developing this one the way he has. I think it's really well balanced, and it's got the bitterness, it's got the sweetness, it's got a lot of those citrusy tropical aromas as well. Really important.
That's awesome. What's the response been from your customers? Because there's a lot of people out there that can't drink gluten or eat gluten, consume gluten. Right. Is it like the lights come on when they walk in your place and it's like, oh, hallelujah! There's a place where I can finally go.
Yeah, well, I'm actually really pleased to tell you, Sean, that the vast majority of our customers don't know that we're gluten-free. They just think they've come into a beautiful space and they're sitting down enjoying a delicious beer. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum are folks who know all too well what we're up to. And we get a lot of tears. We get a lot of people who I haven't had a beer in 10 years. We have an elderly gentleman. He's, I think, early to mid 70s. He's celiac. I don't think he's had a beer in 40 or 50 years. We actually had the Kolsch in the bright tank, our very first batch of Kolsch. And he wandered in here and I got to talking to him and I asked him what kind of beer he remembers drinking when he was younger. And, he loved Pilsner. We didn't have a Pilsner at the time, but I brought him into the brew house and right out of the bright tank, and grown man crying.
Wow.
He was really,
oh my gosh. That experience alone, being brought back into the brewery and tasting something like that's unbelievable.
We've done that a few times with people, even more interesting, people who are unsuspecting. They have no idea. They just think they're coming back into a regular barley-based brewery. And most recently it happened with our hazy IPA with this woman who was a self-proclaimed, hazy snob. She tried every hazy up and down the coast. Same thing, poured her a little sample of our hazy right out of the bright tank. And she said, oh, this is top 3 hazies I've ever had. And
wow.
Then I went through my whole thing about being gluten-free, and she didn't even know what that really meant. Had no idea what millet was, so I had to tell her it's
a haircut.
It's bird seed, essentially. And she was just blown away.
Wow.
So we get a lot of different responses in the tap room here.
That's wild.
It's all wonderful. I eat it up. It really just gets me.
Fuels you.
For sure. Well, it's, I think it's a little different than just like the standard customer business owner relationship, because you can empathize with these people. You can sympathize with them. You've been in their position.
Yeah. So here we are in Oakland, right? We get people who've come all the way up from Monterey, out from Stockton. We had a family of, I want to say 8 or 10 that came out from Reno. They wanted to spend a day out here centered around visiting Buck Wild because their dad or their mom or their grandmother or their oldest child was celiac. So it's pretty special. And And the other thing is, neither of you are probably aware of this, but, you go to a restaurant as someone who has a gluten intolerance, you're looking through a menu and you're reading all of the ingredients. And those that you don't recognize, you're raising your hand and, kind of sheepishly, asking, what is this? Is there gluten in that? Maybe there are 3 or 4 or 5 items on the entire menu that you can consume. You walk into Buck Wild, all of our food, all of our beer, we have 2 wines, everything, 100% gluten-free. It's, you're really able to kind of let your guard down, and it's very liberating. It sounds
exhausting, first of all. It really does. The aspect of going to a restaurant and being hyper consumed about what's on the menu and just being very, very involved for your own health. I mean, that sounds just like an exhausting prospect, but also it sort of mirrors what we've been all going through in the last year and a half, where we're very cautious about what's happening, and that's been exhausting. And now that, I don't even say most people, but a lot of people are vaccinated, you can go places and you can be a little more comfortable. Like you said, let your guard down, although, don't get me started on that. But it's nice. Yep. It's nice that you have a space where it's not just the beer, but like you said, everything that you have, even it sounds like guest taps for wine and such, are gluten-free. You don't, I would imagine that's a big relief off of someone's shoulders to be gluten-free in an area that is catering to them.
Yep. It's very liberating. I mean, I know people who are celiac or, otherwise so sensitive to gluten, they don't even eat out at restaurants, because even if something is marked as gluten-free, there's a risk of cross-contamination, and they just can't take that risk. Wow. So again, to be able to come into a place like this and really not worry about it.
That's wild. And thinking about walking into your space, and I just went right up to the bar to ask if you were around, and I was looking at the board there above the taps, and you're right. I didn't see a single place that said it was gluten-free. So if I just walked in, go, oh, hey, there's a cool spot, let's go grab a drink. Walk in, look at the board, order a drink, I would never have known, ever.
Well,
and I like that.
A couple interesting things around that, Jason. First off, you might not have been looking hard enough, because it is up there.
Right.
But secondly, maybe you shouldn't have had to look that hard. I'll be honest, we're still kind of feeling this out, because, back when we used to be able to do these things called beer festivals, I would, some beer festivals and shouting gluten-free, 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 and, there'd be 30 people in line next to me, right, at the other brewery, and 5 or 6 people in my line. I'd go to the next beer festival, and I wouldn't yell gluten-free quite as loudly. And, there'd be 30 people next to me and 25 people in my line. And I'd have them taste the beer first, get their reaction to it. And then I would talk to them about what it is, and more importantly, what it isn't. So again, we're still trying to feel that out, but we're really trying to lead with flavor. Flavor is first and foremost. It's just a quality craft beer that happens to be gluten-free.
Yeah, that would be tough, because, again, we've already talked about the gluten-free market and beer and whatever, but, how do you advertise? But also, I don't want to say there's a stigma with gluten-free beer, because I don't think that's the right word. But it would take
I think there is. I mean, I think there's there's a preconceived idea of what it is because of what we've seen in the past, And I think, I think what Michael said about, we lead with taste. I mean, that's how you're going to win people over.
Yeah. So, but to his point, how hard do you market that they're gluten-free, especially in your own tap room?
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
Fortunately for us, our core market, the gluten-free market, is a very educated consumer base.
Mm-hmm.
They're very brand loyal, and they're very, I'm at a loss for the right word here, but word of mouth.
I would imagine they're a community that talks to one another. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very tight, I'd imagine, yeah.
And, these are the group of people, much like myself, when they go to a grocery store, they're They're the ones flipping the, box of crackers around, and they're reading every single ingredient. So they're very aware, very informed, very educated. So, it's not that we're neglecting that market segment by not screaming gluten-free, but
sure,
we are just trusting that they will continue to do what they always do and, educate themselves and self-advocate for themselves and be loyal to the brands that work for them.
Yeah, and again, I have a very bad habit of like choosing words that I think might be borderline insulting, and that's not what I mean. But it is sort of like a passive marketing or a passive thing where you leave it up to them to for the most part to figure it out, to learn about it. But you are here, you exist, you have the product. You don't need to put it on a neon sign and have it flashing 24/7 above your spot. And I don't know. I think that's a good space to be in because, like you're saying, you are getting people in who don't know, and that's, I think, the hard market. That's the tough part, is to teach people gluten-free doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. It means flavor.
Yeah, I mean you're hired, Jason.
Hey, yeah. Woo! I don't know.
I'm just trying to think of any other like products and any other, in the consumer space where I think it's like organic wines in some ways. I think there are producers of organic wines that actually sometimes downplay the organic aspect of it because it can be a stigma. But they just want to adhere to these practices when they're making their wine. And so it's whispered and not yelled. And I think that's what it sounds like what Michael's doing at Buck Wild. And also that the celiac, the gluten-free community is so tight. I know that from my two uncles and their families back there that have celiacs, that they are hyper aware of what's out there. They know what to buy. They know what not to buy. They know where to eat. It's like,
it must also be hard to trust new brands too at the same time. Like that's what I mean. It seems like a very exhausting thing to have to go through.
Well, I mean, we as,
like
as a company, right? At the 21st Amendment at 563 2nd Street, and also San Leandro, we often get inquiries about like, is there gluten in this beer or that beer? Also, is it vegan? That's another popular thing.
Yeah, man.
So you were being asked those questions because the consumer in general, I think at large, especially folks who enjoy craft beer, they are curious and they want to know what's going on. They want to know what, the calorie count is, what the carbs are, all that stuff. So I think this is, what Michael's doing at Buck Wild is sort of it's just a big extension of what's happening in the craft beer and greater food space. We want to know what's in this stuff.
That's right.
Exactly. I think there's just a much more self-awareness and focus on what people are putting in their bodies.
Yeah. Agreed. Speaking of that, I just cracked the amber.
That's a good segue, by the way.
Thanks, man. I'm the king of segues. Whatever, dude. So far, this is my favorite beer that I have had from you. It tastes the most like an amber ale, and I love an amber ale. I really do. Actually, it's almost, if I had to pick a nit, it's almost more like a brown ale because there's a little bit of roasty. And there's a lot of sweetness there, but it is by far the beer that tastes most like a beer that I've had so far. And I've liked the other ones. So for me, this is like, I tasted it, I was like, wow, this is the thing. This is the thing.
This amber ale, it's a very special beer. It's very malt forward, which you probably don't hear many people in the gluten-free space saying, hey,
no,
you have a malt forward craft beer.
Yeah.
It's things have improved greatly in the gluten-free brewing space. In the early days, there was a real concerted effort to try to mask the grain bill or the lack thereof by really overemphasizing the hops, right? So a lot of IPAs, a lot of pale ales. But when we did this amber, we really wanted to showcase what gluten-free malt could be. And I think, again, I'm biased here, but I think this amber does exactly that. I mean, just the color alone.
The color looks amazing.
Beer. And, all these, mahogany hues, and you get a lot of caramel out of it. You wouldn't expect this to be a gluten-free grain bill.
No, absolutely not. And, it's almost, well, you could call this an American brown ale and you can get away with it. Because it has that sweetness. There is roasty there too. For an amber ale, maybe it's on the higher side of those things, but they're still very good. I think this rides the line right perfectly in between like an amber and a malty brown ale. It's a good beer. I mean, by definition, this is a very drinkable, highly enjoyable beer.
We have a couple who come in every week. It's their beer. It's all they drink. They go around to all the neighboring breweries, and all they drink are amber ales, and they'll fill growlers of it. They absolutely adore this.
I'm thinking like they must not go to many breweries.
The amber ale couple. That's all they drink is they seek out amber ales.
But like
I think their name is Amber.
Oh, geez. I mean, how many breweries do you think they go to? Like 2. I mean, there's not that many out there.
No. Well, maybe it's a red, or.
Yeah. God, I miss red ales. Can I just say that real fast? I miss a nice American red ale. I really
We have
do.
one coming out soon, by the way.
Do you?
Yeah.
Sean, what's the address?
Come on.
Damn,
I can't say more. What's your address? You should get into this racket. What's your address?
You really should.
Michael.
401 Jackson Street.
401 Jackson Street.
Jackson
Just
Street.
blocks from the retail area of Jack London Square in Oakland.
That's right. Folks might be familiar with Original Pattern.
Yep.
Some friends of ours are just a block and a half away. Oakland United is in the neighborhood. Federation is in the neighborhood. Line 51 is just a mile or so out. Ghost Town Brewing as well. Is,
wow.
A half away. We've got a great community of craft breweries here. It's really a fun spot. And you come down on a sunny Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and they're just bikes and skateboards and dogs and children littered all over the sidewalk. It's a fun scene.
Nice. Yeah. Why did you pick Oakland?
Oakland kind of picked me, to be honest. So when I brewed those first couple batches at Strike Brewing in San Jose, it was more of a proof of concept. At the time, I had come up with maybe 5 or 6 things I wanted to, boxes that I kind of wanted to check to see if this, crazy idea had any legs.
Yeah.
And after, getting the beer into the market, I was really surprised by the reception. And basically, I was able to check all of those boxes, and I would say the proof of concept was a success. And at that time, I set out to try to find a home for Buck Wild. Even though we took all the precautions possible at Strike Brewing, the fact remained that it was a barley-based brewery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a very difficult conversation to have with people to claim to be 100% gluten-free when you're brewing it on shared equipment. Again, we did everything we could. We totally bypassed the whole milling area. All of our malt arrived pre-milled, cleaned all the lines, all the tanks, so on and so forth. But it wasn't really until we could get in our own facility that we could feel totally 100% comfortable. So we started looking for space. For those of you who are not familiar with the geography of the Bay Area, this won't make all that much sense. But, we looked in Martinez, in Benicia, Emeryville, Berkeley, Oakland, Marin. I think it was a 2-year process.
Wow.
And to find a place. And then, and I was looking in kind of the 5,000 to 7,500 square foot range. And we were just striking out place after place. And then we saw this place, which was quite a bit bigger than what we were looking for at the time. But, we decided to stretch a little bit and get into this larger space. And we've had a fair amount of luck throughout this process, believe it or not. I know we've talked a lot about the trials, tribulations, heartache, blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
But finding this place was an absolute, strike of luck. It's in a beautiful building. It's in a wonderful neighborhood. All of these old warehouses are being converted into these 5, 6, 7, 8-story apartment buildings. We have an apartment building across Jackson Street from us, 330 units.
Wow.
It's 8 months old. I mean, it's just, and at last check, it was 90% filled.
Good Lord.
There's just more development going on. Not to get into any political realm here, but a lot of people are leaving San Francisco for nicer weather, more space, affordability, what have you.
Yeah.
And it's landing a lot of people in Oakland. And this waterfront district of Oakland is pretty.
It's really blowing up, and it's not done.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's a great spot. And I mean, I think Oakland is a good match because of, like Sean was saying earlier, I think gluten-free ties in with the food. Oakland is a big food area, a lot of restaurants. A lot of people care about what is in their product, and they will go out of their way to support people who have the stuff in the food that they want, right? But I imagine there's a lot of people who are sensitive to gluten, sensitive to things that go in their food that, they can't afford just to take it at, I can eat wherever, right? A little more picky, a little more choosy. I feel like Oakland is a good spot for that because it does feel right,
Yeah, it's a good point, Jason. And I tell people, if you laid a map of the United States out in front of me and said, point to where you want to launch your gluten-free brewery, I put a finger on Austin, Portland, Boulder, Colorado, and Berkeley, Oakland, California.
For sure.
We are a fantastic market here.
Yeah.
Again, chalk it up to luck. I think we've been very fortunate.
Yeah.
Hey, you mentioned your food program, but you haven't really talked too much about that. What's going on there?
Yeah. So one of the best decisions I made was basically not to operate my own kitchen. I wanted to focus on the brewery and the customer experience. So we connected with a restaurant that's based in San Francisco. Their name is Kitava, Kiava. And they've been in the Mission District of San Francisco for, I guess, about 3 or 4 years now. They are free of gluten, sugars, corn, peanuts, I'm sure, dairy, and I think I'm missing a couple others.
Wow.
So the synergies are just mind-blowing. They got wind of what we were doing out here with Buck Wild, and they approached us, and it's been an absolute wonderful partnership. Again, you can come in here and get 100% gluten-free food, 100% gluten-free beer. Things like fish and chips. If you read our Yelp reviews, you read things like, I haven't had fish and chips in 15 years.
Wow.
So it's really it's a really good partnership. It's working out quite well.
That's crazy.
That's exciting.
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Let's take one last break. We're going to go get the last beer we have, which is the Hazy IPA, and we'll try that, and we'll wrap things up.
Great.
All right? All right, boys. Hang on, everybody. We'll be right back. It's the session.
Segmented, demented, fermented.
It's the session.
All right, thanks for hanging around, everybody. We are wrapping things up here with Mike from Buck Wild in Oakland, California, and, of course, the great Sean O'Sullivan. I'm about to rip the Hazy IPA. First of all, I like the can art. I mean, I like the colors. I mean, the can art is, it's the same shape, but the colors on the Hazy can are cool. I like them. It's like...
really happy with how this turned out.
It's sort of... befitting of a hazy IPA. I don't know what, maybe it's like that matte colored, pink, I guess, but I don't know. It sort of reads hazy to me. I like it.
Yeah. And this new rebranding that we did, I mean, these cans look so great on the shelf side by side. I mean, they just really pop. It's wonderful. Really happy with it.
All right, so talk to me a bit about a hazy IPA. How do you get a gluten-free beer to display as hazy? I mean, I would imagine even just with quote unquote normal grains with gluten, it's hard to do. But is it more challenging when you remove the gluten out of there?
I mean, again, it's going to be the proteins you find in the buckwheat that lend mostly to the haze.
Okay.
If you're a craft brewer, I think you have to have a hazy IPA, right?
Yeah.
Or at least 5.
Yeah, this is and it's very hazy. It's not the gravy that I see on Instagram all the time, which is good. This is it's a see it in the glass. You go, that's a hazy beer for sure.
So this is Enigma, Citra, and Cashmere hops.
Cashmere.
Yeah, there's a very exotic smell in the aroma that and I smell. Look, through this job, I smell a lot of hazy IPAs, and but it's sometimes it's that weird, just exotic thing that makes it stand out, and it does have that sort of juicy, soft, pillowy aroma with that tropical thing coming through, but that. I'm imagining it's that cashmere coming through in the nose that just lends a different sharpness or a different clarity to the aroma. It's a good choice. It smells great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is as one might suspect, this is our most popular beer in the tap room. This and the Kolsch, and we have a coffee stout on tap right now that we did in collaboration with our friends at Bicycle Coffee just down the street. So those few beers move very well in our tap.
And you're serving it on nitro.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I mean,
you're serving this beer on nitro.
The coffee nitro.
Oh, okay. I was like, wow.
Like,
that would
could
be.
You please keep up?
I can't. I'm stuck on this beer. This tastes like a hazy IPA. I would never know.
Well, that's the ultimate compliment. So
absolutely never know. Again, if I'm picking a nit here, maybe it feels a little too sweet. Maybe I would love to see it a touch drier.
Mm-hmm.
But you would never. I mean, you would never ever fucking know that this was not just like an all malt beer. And
Jason means it because he dropped the F-bomb.
That's true. I don't ever swear unless I fucking mean it. No, and it's interesting. Like the amber was my favorite, and I'm not going to say the hazy IPA is my favorite. However, I will say it is the most of all the beers we've had tonight. It's the most beer like, and is that offensive when I say it's the most beer like? Because it sort of puts down on one hand like these aren't real beers because there's not gluten. And I know you know what I mean, but how should we be talking about that?
Going for, so no, I'm not offended.
Okay, good. I want to make sure because I can just be talking and everyone's like shifting uncomfortably.
Well, I think it's not beer like. I think you're using ingredients like you would, when you make beer, you use a lot of different ingredients, all over the map, and sometimes it's rice, sometimes it's oats, sometimes it's millet, sometimes it's buckwheat, whatever. I mean, you're just trying to get to the end. It's all like they're all grown in the ground, they sprout, and you do something with them. I mean, I think when you say beer like, it's almost like you're playing the comparison game. I think what I'm hearing is that you're tasting something that you're in your brain, you're going, I'm not supposed to like this, and you're going, I'm liking this, and at the same time, you're realizing that wow, it's not what I would expect, that it's not being made the way I would expect. So.
Yeah,
I think you need to get over yourself.
It's like driving an EV versus an internal combustion engine car.
Oh, those are completely different. Slow down,
right? Because like they're both cars, but if the EV drives like a gas car, I don't know. That was a very weak analogy, but
it was. But keep going.
But it kind of gets back to what Sean was saying earlier about the preconceived notion, right? The negative connotation that some folks can have around gluten-free beers. I mean. Yeah. If you walked into 21st Amendment and Sean poured you this beer,
I would be insulted first of all because it would be a hazy beer. But it exactly. And this is sort of where I'm going. Right? I'm comparing it like you guys are saying. I'm comparing it to what I know, which is all malt. Well, yeah, I can't even gluten beers, I guess, right? And so I'm trying to figure out the language of now how to talk about it, because it's no longer, well, here's an experiment. It's not really beer, whatever. But all of these taste like real beer, quote unquote. So therefore, I sort of have to adjust my language now to go, well, these are just gluten-free beers. It's not taste like a real beer, because it downplays what you're doing here.
Yeah, it's like your expectation isn't that high, and then it's gone above that. I also think it's like early days of this in some ways. And Michael, you could probably speak to this, is that I don't know, the craft beer industry for gluten-free beers is very small. It's like, it's like when we start putting beer in cans back in 2006, we talked more about the cans than the beer inside. People were like, my God, this is so weird. It's a 6-8% alcohol beer with hops and all this. It's blowing my mind. And they just couldn't get over it. And then now cans are everywhere. It's just, I think that, eventually this is just sort of the beginning. This is like the industry is a little bit, this segment's a little bit like a toddler. It's just starting to walk, and, people getting used to it. Yeah. And eventually it's just going to be like your daughter running around all over the place, and you can't keep up. And it's just ubiquitous.
It's certainly early days in gluten-free craft.
Yeah.
Without question. And it's come a long way. I mean, it's come a long way since I was tinkering in my garage in, 2007 with sorghum honey and agave and maltodextrin and, all that other crap. And, we're just scratching the surface of what can be done with gluten-free beer. So it's a very exciting time to be in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to think we're at the forefront of, when it comes to quality in gluten-free craft beer. And, as I've mentioned, here at 401 Jackson Street, we are.
Attaboy.
Yeah. I'm a quick study.
Yep.
We're the first and only in California doing what we're doing here. So it's a great opportunity for us. And, we take it very seriously, and we're working really hard.
This is a drinkable hazy IPA. It's not aspirin-y. It's not burny. It's not cloying. It's not any of those things. And it's I could drink this.
Well, I know where you can get some more.
What's next for gluten-free beer? Are you going to do like a barrel program or a sour program or any sort of, more traditional things?
We had a guava rosemary gosa.
That sounds delicious.
For about 2.5 weeks.
Damn.
It just blew up.
That sounds amazing, dude. And I feel like that, like Oakland's a perfect space for that. That sounds like some like pop-up, handmade tart, food truck thing, right? It sounds like very like, I don't know, artisanal, or I don't know where I'm trying to go with that, but it sounds very Oakland. It really does. And I mean that in a good way.
I had never had a gosa before. When I stopped drinking, I almost said normal. I didn't do it. Barley-based beers back in 2006, 07.
They didn't exist.
I never had a sour. So this was my first gosa, and it blew me away. I mean, we had Himalayan sea salt in there. I'll tell you though, it's a very polarizing style of beer.
Mm-hmm.
People either try it and they're wondering why this beer tastes salty,
mm-hmm.
And they're turned off. Or there are other people who absolutely just fanboyed all over, crushed it. We had people who would come day after day filling up growler after growler, unlike anything I'd seen with any of our beers to date.
So you're going to do it again?
We have a tart cherry gosa going right now.
Okay. All right.
So very well received.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it could work with with the sort of like mouthfeel, because the gosas aren't very heavy. I think it's the perfect platform. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Guava rosemary, is that what you said?
It was a guava rosemary.
That sounds good.
And we're going to do a tart cherry hibiscus. It's actually in the fermenter right now.
That sounds great.
Ron in the chat is saying, number one, he likes your label design and the gluten-free portion of the label. I'll hold it to the camera. It just says a little, GF down there in the bottom. He said it's like the independent craft label on the beer, and if you're looking for it, it's noticeable, but it doesn't stand out. It's very subtle.
So what was that gentleman's name?
Ron.
So Ron just hit it right on the head. I mean, our whole marketing approach to how we handle gluten-free, we're not hiding it. It's there. It's very much front and center, but we're not screaming it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's much more about Buck Wild and about hazy and, flavor first.
Yeah. And then he says there's a brewery, he can't remember the name, but they do a lot with watermelon, and maybe like a watermelon buckwheat collaboration would be good. I don't know. That's what he says.
I'm game. That sounds like fun.
Sounds refreshing, man. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, Mike, thanks a lot, man, for coming on the show. I appreciate it. The beers are great. I was very excited to talk to you about this. So, Sully, thanks for facilitating, for doing your Sully magic, so to speak. But I think, it is a very exciting time to be in this space. And, just when you thought like craft beer didn't really have anywhere to go unless we just put more lactose in different beers, this is a nice reminder about there's really no boundaries that we can do in this industry. This is great. If anybody's like me, you sort of wrote off gluten-free beers. But if you are like me, I highly suggest going to Buck Wild. Come out to Oakland, check it out, because it will definitely change your mind on what gluten-free beer can be.
Well, that's a great plug, Jason. We appreciate it. And
you're welcome.
Our tagline is craft beer for all. That's what we're aiming to be.
You can definitely do that, man. If you have a friend who's gluten-free and you're not, this is a place where you can go and get a beer and you won't notice the difference. Truly.
And you might even enjoy it.
You might even enjoy it. You never know. Who can really tell? Anyway, Mike, where can people go to learn more about your beers and your brewery and all that kind of good stuff?
They can come to 401 Jackson Street in Oakland, California, 94607.
That's right.
All joking aside, come on down to the brewery. This is the best place. We love questions. We love talking about what we're doing down here. Love to welcome you into the space. Of course, we have a presence on the World Wide Web, buckwildbrew.com. A lot of information there as well.
All right. You got it. All right, Sully, thanks again, as always, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, honestly, this is great. I mean, we talk a lot. We have guests on the show, and they're great. But this has been an amazing show.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Because it's like it just kind of takes your mind here and just opens it up a little bit. So,
yeah,
Michael, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you both. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone on Facebook, thanks a lot for tuning in. I appreciate it. And if you're listening live and if you want to join in the fun, just follow our social media accounts at, I'm sure, the Brewing Network and variations thereof across Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And you'll know just when we go live and when we post these shows. So you can be like Ron and ask 3 questions. And I think that was really good. So thanks. Thanks to Ron questions. And everybody listening. Anyway, everybody, thanks a lot for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
JP's an asshole. Justin's a nice guy and winning the race. JP does great as his charity case.